Welcome to episode number 41 of the Road to Cinema podcast, featuring screenwriter Jesse Andrews of the new film Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, opening in theaters on Friday, June 12th. In this innovative coming-of-age story, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl tells the story of Greg, a high school senior who avoids friendship at any cost, except with his best friend Earl, who he spends most of his time with, making parodies of classic movies. His outlook on life changes forever when he befriends a classmate who has just been diagnosed with cancer. On today's episode, Jesse Andrews discusses the development of his novel for Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which became a bestseller. We'll also discuss the personal, real-life inspiration behind the story for Jesse, as well as how director Alfonso Gomez-Rejon went to Pittsburgh, Jesse's hometown, and filmed in many of the real locations that Jesse grew up in. We'll also delve into Jesse's process for writing his very first screenplay and the mentorship taken in by producer and fellow screenwriter Dan Fogelman. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, to read the Road to Cinema blog, and to watch our Road to Cinema YouTube series, please visit jogroadproductions.com. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our Jog Road Productions YouTube channel, and you can also write us a nice review on the iTunes podcast page for the Road to Cinema podcast. And by doing all of those things and engaging with us on social media, you'll be entered into a contest to win a free download of the Final Draft screenwriting software brought to you by our friends at Final Draft. And now we join screenwriter Jesse Andrews as he discusses the inspiration behind writing Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which opens in theaters on Friday, June 12th.
I wanted to write something funny, and I wanted it to be about something that was not funny at all, So I had written 2 books before that point, which were unpublishable. It was pretty terrible. And that was, me learning how to write and what not to do, basically. And, and they did not get published. And so, I wanted to kind of simplify it, make something that really rewards the reader for reading it, and does that by being funny but about something. So as far as the specific story, it's not my own story. I was, lucky enough to not have this happen to anyone who was close to me in high school. But as I was preparing to write it, my grandfather was terminally ill, and so, I was thinking a lot about how exchanges with him were never, the regret that you would feel, that I would feel after talking to him, that I didn't say the right thing, or I didn't do the right thing, and I wish I could do it again. But even if I had, that probably wouldn't be right either. I would still recriminate myself. And, I was watching my mother go through this and others in my family. And I just knew, if I can make something funny about that, then that's worth making. Or I'm just a monster, but one or the other. And, and I had someone I knew in the industry suggesting that I write a book for and about teenagers, and that
so
worked.
Originally, were you thinking of doing it focusing on death, but outside of teenagers in a way?
No, it started with the teenage thing. Let's write something funny for teenagers about something hard, and then it became, about death or the likelihood of death, the beginnings of grief, and and that was a thing, that was a trope that I knew existed in young adult fiction too, and often had a kind of moralistic quality to it. There's some kind of tidy lesson teaching that would happen, and usually like romance too, some doomed romance would happen, and I just wanted to do something different with it and wanted to bring a kind of realism to it, so that was the hope.
For you, when you're working on a novel specifically, are you thinking of characters? Are you building out the story before you really sit down and write the first page?
I have a rough sketch of the story, but it's I usually write pages to figure out who these people are and figure out what they say and how they interact with each other, what they do. And
Is their voice a particular part of that as well?
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. Although that changes too. It's often about getting it wrong so that you can eventually get it right, and have them say some stuff and, okay, that's completely wrong, but, I have to leave it in there until I know what the right thing is. And, my entire process is just about writing the bad version until the one bad version teaches you what the good version would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Transferring it into a film, was that ever in your mind when you were writing the novel? Did that ever cross your...
No, not at all.
Or even film in general, when you were writing novels, did you ever think about being a screenwriter or...
No, I never had any desire to... Not desire. I never had any... It just never occurred to me that was something that I could do, And that seemed like a much more institutionalized kind of way of writing, that like you really can't be outside of the gates and trying to do that, you have to have like some people telling you how to do it, you need to be aware of the conventions and yeah, you need to have some connection to the people who hopefully will one day make this thing, whereas like writing a novel, any idiot can do that, and you just like sit down and type, and then eventually that thing is the thing. Screenwriting seemed to have much more of a connection to like, terminology, jargon, and I just didn't have any of that. But then, my agent puts the book in front of Dan Fogelman, and he says, let's try to have the author write the script. And there are passages in the book that take the format of a screenplay, but that wasn't, honestly, those are in there because I think they just look very funny, There's just a lot of comedy and like the disconnect between the sort of the kind of formality of, that presentation and what's actually happening and being said, because there's a lot of just Greg's dumb stream of consciousness stuff, or these exchanges that are, full of repetitions and pauses and hopefully, some like kind of teenage naturalism that looks really like out of place and funny in that format.
For you, did anything change from the novel to writing the screenplay? Did you see the story in a different light or any of the characters differently?
Sure I did. Yeah, a lot changed. And maybe the biggest conceptual change is that the book is in the first person, and the movie, a movie kind of can't be in the first person. Even if it's got voiceover, you're still outside of the main character, and you also see the other characters as they are rather than as this character sees them, So in the book, you get much more incomplete glimpses of the characters, the people in Greg's world, because he's the one narrating it, and he doesn't really learn to pay attention until the end. In some ways, this is the story of him learning to pay attention to other people.
Where he sees them more clearly as the story progresses in a way.
Yeah, sees them more fully, realizes, the assumptions that he makes about them, realizes the ways in which any person can surprise you. Any person has more to them than you'll ever understand. That's hopefully that's the worldview of the book and the movie, and, that's kind of my personal worldview.
So I was reading that Dan Fogelman was really a huge mentor to you as you were working on the screenplay, and learning how to be a screenwriter in a sense. So I'm sort of curious if there were any lessons that you learned from him in that process.
Yeah, there really were. There were more than I can even articulate to myself. But the biggest lesson was just to just make mistakes, and that was something that he told me at the beginning, that he didn't want me to over-educate myself about the form before trying to write a script. He said, buy some screenwriting books if you want to do that, that's fine, and I support that. But if you don't want to do it, I really don't want you to feel obligated to do it. And you might even mess yourself up a little bit. You need to make the mistakes that you're going to make, and some of them we'll have to correct, but then some of the quote-unquote mistakes will be the reason this script is distinctive and interesting, and we don't know until you make them. So, it was a lot about process. I mean, a lot of the mechanics of screenwriting I almost learned more from observation than from him teaching to me. You know, I would just read his scripts and see the seamless ways in which he would build to a reveal in this way where it's both inevitable but also totally surprising, you know? And that's art as well as craft, and that's something that he does so well. And, you know, and I would feel it like in the way that he would pitch me on things too. I came to understand the ways in which in a screenplay you can use a thread of storyline to stand for something larger. For example, the way in which Greg's feelings about college are a reflection of his feelings about really his future, you know, the rest of his life. And so his optimism or pessimism about college, as we track it through the movie, follows, you know, his feelings about just the future, what's in store for him, you know, his possibility, potential. And yeah, the college, that book, you know, is a neat little way of doing it.
I was curious as well, you know, when Alfonso came on to develop the film further, did, you know, he has such a strong visual style that you see in the film, did he sort of implement onto you, like, I see, you know, I see this scene looking this way, or I see this music, or any kind of visual cues that kind of inspired you more as you were writing?
Well, we would talk about that kind of stuff, but I mean, basically, as far as like how the movie looks and how that is conveyed in the script, it's really kind of not. And what I really wanted to do instead with the script was just to convey the tone and give him as much freedom as possible to decide how he was going to enforce that tone, or, you know, make it richer and more complex by adding himself to it. And yeah, as soon as he came on board, the process became just entirely about giving him whatever he wants and whatever he can work with, and anything that he can use, wonderful. If it's something that he's having trouble using, it needs to be replaced with something better that suits him better. Because I just knew, like, this is a guy who, if you let him make the thing he wants to make, you know, it's going to be incredible.
Some screenwriters talk about being left out of the process when the director comes on, but did you feel you were really a collaborator?
No. Oh, my God,
this was really a team effort.
It was a team effort, although I don't want to oversell, you know, my authorship of this movie. You know, he directed the shit out of this movie, you know. So it's like, I just tried to make the script a sort of living document, you know, that responded to his needs and the actors' needs and everything. You know, and just be a part of this team, you know, such a cool team.
Yeah.
Like,
For you, so, you know, Pittsburgh is where you're from. It's where the story takes place. When you knew that Alfonso wanted to shoot in Pittsburgh, was it a surprise to you that he was going to go to your house, he was going to go to your school, that he was really going to imbue you into the movie, in a sense, your past?
That was weird. And there was he didn't intend to do that until he saw my house, and then until he saw my school.
So he was out location scouting in Pittsburgh,
he was
looking for the perfect place.
Exactly, And he just, he stopped by my parents' house just to say hey to my parents. And also, my brother-in-law was a sort of uncredited location scout, kind of. So, just he piled into the van with Alfonso and the producers and Jerry, the production designer, and, and guided them around, too. He runs Bike Pittsburgh, which is, so he has a great sense of the city and how it looks and where stuff is. And he just, a whole bunch of them went over to my parents' place, and, and they walked in and they were like, oh, this house is kind of, it's kind of distinctive. It's interesting. And, my dad was really against the whole idea. He hated that idea until it happened, and then he was completely on board with it.
Oh, the camera equipment and the trucks and all that stuff, that wasn't...
Yeah, he didn't love that idea, but actually the thing he hated the most was just, he was like, I don't want to have to not live at my house for 2 weeks. It's like, I don't want to live at a hotel. It's like, well, I get that.
Was it pretty much set dressed from scratch? Like, was furniture moved out and everything?
They used a lot of the stuff that's in there.
Really?
So that bookcase behind the shot of Greg and Earl, that was one of the first shots to be used sort of for publicity. Those are mostly my parents' books. That's like a little bucket of toys that my sisters and I played with growing up.
Yeah. You talked a little about how like Greg really isn't you in a sense, like the circumstances that happened around him, but the feelings that Greg was going through when, in high school, was that you at all? Was any of that sort of making friends with different groups and not really committing to one set?
Sure. Some of that was me. Although I had closer friends than Greg did. I also went to a school that all the groups kind of bled into each other, and there were kids really from all walks of life. It was very like racially and sort of class-wise diverse, so everyone is kind of like traveling among circles too. But yeah, in Greg, I wanted to write a character who kind of thinks that he's the only one who does that. Yeah. That it's almost this like unconscious manifestation of like teenage ego, teenage self-involvement. You just can't see beyond what's outside of your own head.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Burden of Dreams, that documentary. The film so much.
Yeah,
when was your first kind of initiation into that movie?
Into Herzog? Well, I started with Agura, Wrath of God, and that was when I was pretty young, maybe 11, 12, 13. And specifically what that movie means to me, and Werner Herzog and that part of Herzog's work,
Fitzcarraldo,
exactly, Cobra Verde, what all those mean, I was introduced to them by my older sister, basically, who was just out of the blue one day. It's like, hey, Agura, the Wrath of God, this movie's awesome, you need to see it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was just delighted that she was like, sharing something with me and not, like denigrating, because we had this like older sibling, younger sibling thing. Anyway, she shows me this, and I sit down and I watch the movie, and it's amazing, but it's also, it was so unexpected kind of coming from her that like, it just, I realized, it was this flash of like, your sister is like so much more interesting and complicated than you had thought previously, than your little 13-year-old mind had. You just conceived of her as this person. She's 4 years older than you, and she's, kind of tough and, frightening. But actually, she also has this great curiosity and sense of humor. And so that movie, to me, stands in for that revelation anytime, that people are always more interesting and surprising and complex than you think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I wanted to wrap things up by talking about the premiere at Sundance, which was an incredible reception to the film.
Yeah.
What was that like, seeing people have such a visceral, emotional reaction to something that you've been working on for so long, dating back to the novel and then into the script?
Yeah, it's really incomparable, It's exactly what you hope for, but you also, I came to it, I was already at a place in my life where I had really come to value process over outcome, and if I'm making the things that, that I want to make, and, and being open and, disciplined and empathetic, then that's all I can control. So whether the thing gets published or not, whether the movie gets made or not, as long as I do well in the things that I can control, then I can, I can sleep at night and feel good about it. And so, and that sustained me through a time when the outcomes were not like very good, and the response was not very good. And then it becomes a philosophy that you have to still kind of cling to when stuff is going really well. And I'm sorry, that's a very abstract answer.
But it makes sense, because process, sometimes is more important to focus on that as opposed to sort of
to me it's always
for a good, compliment or
exactly,
which may or may not come. So you always have to.
You can't write for compliments. You can't write for praise. You just have to write honestly and thoughtfully and just put as much of yourself as you can into it. But then when like you do, it seems, succeed in making this thing that you wanted to make and like actually connect to people and reach people, I mean, my God, it's just, it's like such a gift, you just feel such gratitude for having gotten the chance to do it. And you know, I just felt like very lucky and kind of made stupid by all of it. And I was just like wandering around, like seeing other movies too, and the idea that like I get to share company with these other filmmakers, you know, the other inhabitants of this world. It just felt really, really, yeah, and I mean, I was also just waiting for the other shoe to drop, like some karmic, you know, thing to happen to right the balance. So yeah, mostly like guilt and shame, I would say, is what I felt.
Well, I love the film, and I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Jeff. Thanks so much. Thank you.